Hi, Jeff Kitchen with Story Bin, Writer's Room Improv. Today, my two guests are John Smallcombe, a producer living in Sweden, and Nicole Sacker, a writer living in West Los Angeles. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves? John, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I'm John. I've been in the film industry for 50 years. I'm recently a producer. For 7.5 years, I just developed and finally made a film called Across the River and Into the Trees, which is based on a novel by Ernest Hemingway. We finished shooting in Venice, Italy, with Liev Schreiber, Josh Hutchins, Matilda De Angelis, and Laura Morante. I'm currently developing 4 or 5 projects, inclusive of a TV series.
Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'm Nicole Sacker, and I worked in the industry, I guess, for 20-something years. I worked in production until I got pregnant with my first child, and then I just focused solely on the writing. And I've been working with a writing coach that's really helping me write my best work. And this year I've been very prolific. I have 4 projects. My brand of writing is like flawed female protagonist, dramedy, dark comedy. But I'm also doing a rewrite for a pretty big company, and it's a teen comedy that I wrote in 2012. And it's a very commercial, like big concept. So what I'm hoping is that this comedy is going to like open the doors. I have one film that's out that I did some writing on a few years ago called Running for Grace, 2018. And it stars Matt Dillon and Jim Caviezel. And you could see that on Netflix, I believe. It had a small theatrical run. So that's what I'm working on.
Nice.
Great.
Okay.
That's awesome. Let's pick a story idea. A guy wakes up next to a dead woman and has no idea how she got there. And we can change the sexes, and we can adjust this any which way we want.
Mm-hmm.
But does this sound like something that would be fun to play with?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
What do you think, John?
Yeah. No, I think so. We can do whatever. As I say, I'm more than happy for Nicole to drive the bus and I can chip in.
Okay.
Because,
I've never done this sort of thing either, so.
Okay, but,
Full disclosure, but.
So where should we start? Is it a man or is it a woman? Let's start basic, who's dead and who's alive?
I think there's like a few ways that like the main character could be somebody like the stakes are high. He's about to become elected to this big office.
And he's married with a family.
Oh, wow. Yeah. He's married with a family. So that's like kind of like the first where my mind goes, but then there's like a whole different direction it goes in, which is like a person, I don't know, a guy or a girl who's contemplating killing themselves. And they're going to do it. And they've written the letter and everything. And then they wake up. I mean, they see this dead person next to them. So it's kind of like it stops them from doing it because like they have to think about this person next to them. It's probably like the one thing that would stop them from killing themselves. I don't know. That's just where my mind went.
That's a very interesting program. Let's play with that and let's just work out how she got there.
And is it perhaps more dynamic for it to be a woman because we've seen it, a man finding a woman in his bed multiple times?
The question is, I don't know, it just feels a little bit more comfortable that a man is contemplating suicide.
There's a higher rate amongst men with suicide.
Okay.
I mean, just doing the suicide thing. I mean, it does also feel like we see men getting in a hotel room with some escort. We've seen that before.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's try and make this suicide
Okay.
situation work, and let's try and see which could be a credible way of him waking up next to somebody. And what would a person on the verge of suicide, would they be out partying because it's the last night on earth? Or is this, how does the
Yeah.
woman get it? Partying doesn't seem to go with suicide.
Right. Exactly. So I
But
guess
blackout drunk does. You get
Yeah.
blackout drunk and come home with some anybody or some nobody, whatever. And does the is this a person of power, or is this a person of little significance? Because that affects the perceived stakes as well.
I would have thought by the suicide commentary that this is some existential moment where he has to realize that this is going to perhaps stop him from, it's either going to stop him from committing suicide, or it's perfect. She's showing him the way.
Right.
It depends how dark or crazy you want this story to go, and what does he do with the dead woman? I don't want to.
And
go
are
down
there
that road.
ramifications? Like if he just kills himself right there,
Yeah,
his
it's a
corpse
double
gets
suicide.
found with another corpse, and maybe it screws up the insurance money that's supposed to go to his family because he's now a suspect in a murder.
That's
Is there any of those kind of things?
Yeah, that's interesting, actually.
That's good. That's good. It's pretty fucked up, his basic plan, and he's got to think very fast about what does he do next.
But does he have a family? If we're going to go with the suicide route, I mean, does he? Most people that kill themselves don't have a family. But if he has a family, I guess that raises the stakes. I mean,
but also, you could go one route where he starts to investigate the dead body and finds a purse, opens it up, and you see she's got this family, and this is an interesting psychological premise of whether this will change your plan of committing suicide or whether it just accelerates your plan. So I think one has to decide whether this is a moment that it wasn't expected, but he somehow has to, challenge himself again to whether to go through this or not. She's just lost a life with perhaps much to live for, and he is throwing his life away. So
this is like the woman in bed with him is like a high-flying somebody with a lot to live for and kids and
could be
that kind of thing.
Could be.
And often in this type of story, the activity that's prompted by this catalyst of the dead body sort of reawakens the person to a sense of purpose in life by the end of the story. It certainly doesn't have to go that way, but that's one direction that this type of story sometimes goes.
Direction. It's a less dark direction. I guess it's a brighter direction. It's a great premise for a chamber film. It's all in one room.
Right.
And
well, unless you have to get out and investigate in the world to figure out who she was or what happened or how she ended up there.
Well, no, that's true. That's true.
But that can still be certainly a limited.
Yeah.
You can certainly limit the budget on that and keep it small.
But there's also a lot of conversations he could have with this dead woman. Props her up in the bed and tries to get her to explain what happened to her and how she's fucked up his perfect moment to commit suicide.
It was kind of funny.
And if this person happened to have a law enforcement background, like a detective or something like that, someone like Sherlock Holmes could read a lot just from observing this woman and what she has on her and deduce and investigate. And certainly crooked cops definitely feel suicidal and commit suicide. And
Yeah, I know someone who was a crooked. Well, I don't know if he was crooked, but he was some right winger, and but he killed himself. He was a cop, and he killed himself. He's somebody I know's boyfriend.
it reminds me a bit of the Harvey Keitel movie, The Bad Lieutenant. Did either of you guys see that?
I
It rings
saw,
a bell.
I don't remember it.
Rings a bell.
It was like back in 92 or something like. Harvey Keitel is a wildly out of control crooked cop who's heavy into drugs and gambling.
Mm.
And there's a nun gets raped and he's trying to solve the case. And it's an astonishing performance. It's Abel Ferrara directed it. But it's someone who's basically, because their conscience has been awakened, they kind of plunge into an ugly, kind of seedy underworld and take action with things like, for instance, all of that kind of came from the flicker of an idea of like, what if this woman was like sexually trafficked prostitute or something like that, where she's basically like owned by somebody, and maybe like with his last breath he wades into this criminal underworld and takes it apart or something like that.
So is this going to be like a redemption story? Like, is he going to get a second chance to turn his life around, or is it going to be like really fucked up, like you guys said, like where he's like, oh, well, like now I have an idea of how to do it and succeed? Like, how would Tarantino direct this?
Well, the thing about once you've made a decision to commit suicide, in certain types of movies, there's a liberation to it because you've already decided to pull the pin. In other words, if he went wild to try to destroy this sex trafficking ring, he's not expecting to live through it. So he'll take bigger risks, more explosive action, more dynamics, more willing to give of himself to get somebody out of the system and take down the boss.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a dynamic freedom because you don't give a fuck anymore. It's like, I'll do anything. And sometimes, you know, the person who first swore to uphold the law, that sense of desire for justice can emerge in seeing such an ugly, sex trafficking ring with minors and all that stuff, where he's like, he's going to get to be Batman for one night and fix something for a change instead of
and it's going to give
always
a purpose.
Instead of always just taking bribes to look the other way and killing people to shut them up and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like, this doesn't involve suicide, but that film, The Verdict, with Paul Newman, basically he's like this ambulance chaser lawyer, alcoholic.
Yeah.
He's just a kind of a mess with his life. His wife left him, and his friend brings him this case. He's like, this is the last time I'm going to bring you something. You take it, just take the settlement. You won't get anything this good again. And the victim is this paralyzed woman in a coma. Like, the family wants to pull the plug so they can like get her inheritance. He has like a purpose. He gets a purpose. And it just makes me think of this idea. If this guy was going to kill himself and he was crooked. Yeah, I like that idea of him being a crooked guy who's going to kill himself, and he gets involved with something like a drug trafficking ring. And then, so where would you go from here, Jeff?
Well, if he is fascinated by kind of the mystery of it and who she is, maybe her phone rings and it's her boss, and he's kind of hideous, and I don't know if our guy would pick up the phone and listen or just listen to the message afterwards. But if something pisses him off enough that he decides he's kind of going to go out in a blaze of glory or take this guy with him maybe he texts back, since obviously he can't call back, to say, can you pick me up at so-and-so? I twisted my ankle, or, something as simple like to lure the guy out, get him. And even if it's just a driver, he would basically take the driver captive and force him to take him back to wherever they operate and see what they're up to and try to hatch a plan, which could easily be a suicide plan. In other words, he knows he's not going to get out of there alive, but he's going to punch a big hole in this operation that's turning out 14-year-old girls or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see Tarantino's take on something like that. It'd be quite a ride through that world.
So how would the sex trafficking girl arrive? So is she 14?
I don't know.
So how would she end up in his bed?
Well, if he is suicidal and getting ready to do it, he's probably not sitting around watching reruns of Lucy. He's probably, weeping and miserable and playing Russian roulette, probably gets alcohol, too much of it, maybe picks up a hooker on the way back and a kind of blackout drunk.
Okay.
It's that kind of absolutely bottoming out behavior.
Forgive me for being clueless, but are there sex trafficking rings? Where's this set? Are there, I'm in LA, if a guy is suicidal and he goes out drinking for his last night, is there one of these girls to be around there? Or I don't know, where are they? I thought they were I don't even know where these girls end up. I don't know much about it.
I don't either, but I would think that some of them would be street side prostitutes, and you just, she's like, hey, sailor, I want a good time, and he takes her back to his hotel. It doesn't have to be a lot more complicated than that. And she could be 14, which he wouldn't maybe notice until the next morning.
I mean, so is she related to the drug cartels and all that, or is she a local, is he just going to go break up some local pimp type thing? Or is it, would it not be that at all? Would it be, I don't know, I'm just thinking if it's a crooked cop, who does he hate?
If this was a Lithuanian mob that was sex trafficking teenagers and, and they sell drugs on the side and do extortion, whatever, that he can wade into their operation and do as much damage as he can before they destroy him. Kind of like a suicide mission. And it really can be anything we want it to be. It could be a bunch of old ladies that are sex trapped. It could be the opposite of what you'd think. They're not the least hardened criminal looking. I mean, that's a bit extreme potentially, but
what old ladies are at the head of the ring?
It's certainly possible.
Well, there's that Jeffrey Epstein thing, and that woman is on trial right now.
Yeah.
She's a British socialite.
Yeah.
What's her name? Forgot her name.
Giselle
Maxwell. Yeah.
Maxwell.
Ghislaine
Maxwell. That's
Ghislaine.
Yeah. So, I mean, it could be something like that.
Yeah. And it doesn't, if we want to run with some kind of organized crime, prostitution, or that organized crime operation that has a heavy prostitution ring, then the particulars of who's behind it don't necessarily matter all that much. That might crystallize more as we play with the story.
Yeah, I mean, I in my writing, I'm very character focused. All my stuff, it's I start with character, whether it's this raunchy teen comedy or that I'm doing for this big company, or my, female dramedy, dark comedy. And so with this story, it just makes me think I want to know about this guy, this crooked cop. How did he get like that? What's going on with him? What, you know what I mean? How did he get to the place of hating all these people and hating himself and wanting to kill himself. And I mean, does he find that out kind of while he's, on this journey to whatever, break up this crime ring?
Well, sure. I mean, we could certainly learn that stuff as we go along. I mean, at first glance, it seems like that type of person would commit suicide for one of two reasons. And there's probably more than that, but at first glance, I see two. One is that he has been a really corrupt person for maybe decades, and finally, in the process of killing one of his informants who was going against his operation, ends up killing the guy's little 8-year-old girl, and something cracks in him, and he like, I'm a monster, I'm just going to off myself. Or it could be the opposite, where he's about to be convicted, and it's like the jig is up and he's just going to blow his brains out so he doesn't do time in jail with the people he put in jail. So, those are two simple, basic ways that occur to me off the top of my head.
Yeah. And I like this crooked cop idea, but I'm just thinking, because I know a few people who killed themselves. One of them was like at the top of his game, very not a crooked cop. I guess he's kind of public, but this guy, he was like the head of Apple Music. He started off at A&R Rhino Records, like Steve Jobs, plucked him out of Rhino and gave him a job at Apple. I was at one of his 8 memorials. He had like the mayor there. Anyway, big guy, big public figure. People tweeted about him. He killed himself a few years ago. He was like 62, 63. But this person, and I always think people like that, like he had everything, but he didn't have a wife, kids. So it's kind of like you have less reason to do stuff like that when you have a family.
Right.
So I'm just thinking, I'm always like, yeah, like One Direction is like the person that doesn't have the family, why did they kill themselves? We can kind of see it, but I guess the crooked cop is the other direction. I like the idea of the crooked cop who finds redemption. 'Cause even though I write dark stuff, like I do like seeing, I want to see this crooked guy turn his life around and have a purpose. So,
and that doesn't mean he makes it out of there alive either. He can totally have a purpose and do some good finally,
and
die taking out the head person or something like that.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to like walk off into the sunset hand in hand.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I have a friend who deals in the fashion world, and she's like saying how all these container ships there's like a big thing happening in Mexico, and the cartels are involved. And it's like we forget about the cartels because they don't really make it in our news on a day-to-day basis, but they're like huge.
Right, and they've probably gotten much more sophisticated, so you're not seeing the normal stupid kind of trying to get it across the border. They probably make the containers out of compressed cocaine. Like they're so good at hiding it that they're under the radar a lot.
Yeah, and all these crooked cops and pro-gun people, cartel guys, are getting all their guns from us. We're just sending them guns. So
Makes
it's like
sense.
maybe he sees that he's connected to all this. That's if we went the cartel route.
Yeah, and part of the fun of this story could be that as he pokes this sex trafficking ring, he finds that there's like a major narcotics operation linked to it as well, so that he can maybe take down that. I don't know, just a chance to do more damage on his way out. Even if he lives in the end, but, the idea that he's perfectly happy to die taking out as many as he can. And then if he ends up living, that's probably a plus for him. I would think maybe he finds a reason to live as a result of all that. Or if he ended up killing a kid in the process of executing an informer that was turning honest, maybe he ends up finding a kid in the end who's the same age and, wants to raise her, wants to do something right to make up for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
And that has some emotional power in the ending, which is good. But it seems kind of like a Mission Impossible or the Dirty Dozen type thing where, it's a suicide mission against impossible odds, trying to take down a monster or a group of monsters if there's a constellation of criminal enterprises that he stumbles into.
Yeah. So where do we go from here?
Basically, it seems like it would start out with some detective work. Presumably, her phone obviously has a cross-section of stuff, and he's got her thumbprint and her face so he can get into it. That gives him access to the boss who's maybe called. And so he could be in shock at how young the girl is, angry when the boss leaves a really nasty message, and it just kind of rubs him the wrong way, and he finds a way to get back to where the boss is and check things out. Even if, like he has somebody come pick the girl up and he seizes that person and makes them take them back to where the operation is, then he can surveil them and decide what move he's going to make. Does he do it all on his own? Does he bring in somebody to help him? And that brings up the question of what kind of friends might this person have? Does he just use the last of his money to hire a hit squad? Does he get another fellow crooked cop or a gang leader that he's done corrupt business with and they have a sense of morality about turning out kids or something like that and want to... Plus, it's a chance for them to rip off this operation. He's like, I just want to kill them all. You guys can take all their shit. I was like, they're like, okay. That could be, it's like the strange war makes for strange bedfellows. Who might he ally with if there's no way he could do it by himself?
That's interesting. Yeah, I like that.
John, I would love to get you in the loop. Do you have any thoughts or ideas or?
I'd be more interested in the psychological aspect of what's led him to suicide and, more of a misery setting, not, that would be more my inclination.
Well, do you want to take a stab at his psychology? Just kind of think about what might have led him to this and what might activate him to develop a sense of outrage when he hasn't had any for quite some time with that?
It would be more like a sort of a Sid and Nancy sort of situation of, a bedroom, somebody's dead, he wants to kill himself. It would take a lot longer to work this out as to whether it was a double suicide pact and he didn't die.
Okay.
Or whether he goes to a bar, meets somebody, she doesn't have anywhere to stay. He kind of thinks, well, and I've got a place, I'm not going to be around long. Bring somebody back who's fighting hard to live and he's fighting hard to die, and where those two worlds might collide.
That's interesting, because if she really has something to live for, that can kind of ignite not just his conscience, but crap, on my way out, I've managed to destroy a good life somehow.
Yes.
Yeah, keep running with that a little if you could.
I mean, I like the idea of making something out of nothing, and two people in a room is the potential biggest challenge of a writer's world, and to try and make something from that, like a two-hander, without no outside. But I'm not a story person.
Well, that's okay, because you've awakened an interesting possibility that perhaps they get into an extended conversation before she dies and she has a lot to live for. What it suggests is the possibility that they have quite an animated conversation before she dies, in which she is someone who has a lot of hope and a lot of plans.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that's good because she, if they met in some seedy place and, and he starts to tell her a bit about himself and she starts to realize that he is going to kill himself, and she spends the evening trying to find out why he's doing it and why he shouldn't do it, and then
the death and the suicide, like her dead body,
yeah,
till the end. It's not
or till halfway through, and then
halfway through. Yeah, I have to say I'm more like John. Like I'm more the types of films I tend to like are more psychological. Like it's not to say I don't like the action stuff, but I want it to be rooted in like some solid characters and psychology, human behavior. And so to me, it would be more interesting if she dies halfway through.
What's interesting is that like he has a lot, but he wants to end it. She has practically nothing, and she presumably sees the glass as half full and
correct.
Wants to start a business, wants to, whatever it is, she's in the middle of all the misery that she's in. She sees life and energy and sees a way out. And almost like he'd be ashamed of himself for feeling so sorry for himself when he's doing well in a lot of different ways. And she's at the very bottom of the totem pole.
Now, that's an interesting premise. I do like this idea, though. I do. There's something about this that's
this is the kind of thing I would watch.
Yeah, it's very intriguing because it's the dark and the light together, trying to find, and she loses what she wants, and he's got what she wants, and he wants to get rid of it so cheaply. I mean, it's so full of big messages of the human condition.
And it's someone who's kind of blasting off for the heavens in really difficult circumstances, running into someone who's kind of driving down into death with all that same energy too. And it's a dynamic meet up, and that can really catalyze his reaction to not only avenge the way she's been treated, but to, take down the whole thing that was destroying her and other people like her.
But she may not be being destroyed by anything other than life itself. If you're you left home and at 16 or something and you're trying to make ends meet, or you went to Hollywood to try and build a life and all you've ended up is homeless, you're just your bag and trying to survive, but you still got this dream of better things that you've always dreamt about, that you were going to be a somebody. You weren't going to be a shelf stacker in some village in the middle of America, but you were going to be a somebody.
Right.
And, the tragedy of life is that that's very difficult to be. Well, you're always a somebody, but not that somebody.
And her positivity colliding with his negativity is an interesting dynamic.
That's what I find super interesting.
Yeah.
And her fragility.
Yeah.
And his fragility, but for different reasons.
Absolutely.
So anyway, it's been a rewarding get-together.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. And I think we've also done enough so that we've given one possible shape to this raw premise that really has some juice in both the psychological realm and has some action as well. I think we took a successful run at this story and kind of cobbled something interesting together out of it. Well, thank you guys. This was great. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Nicole, lovely to meet you.
Yeah, nice meeting you.